It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's hard to follow the wisdom of attorney Jennifer Nicolotto. She is an important leader, I think, in the community that advocates for access, and it is also a subject that I care deeply about as well. Shona among them. And so many of you, and I really sort of reflect back when, as a supervisor in my freshman year in 2005 and 2006, we embarked on writing the legislation that regulated the medical marijuana dispensaries, and it turned out to be a long law, much too bureaucratic in some respect, but it was a necessary law because I did not like, after years of working on behalf of the medical marijuana advocacy community, working with them, to see the conservatism that was really being forged against allowing medical marijuana to be made available in San Francisco. And it was a real paradox, because if you ask maybe 80% of the people in the streets, you know, what do you think about medical marijuana? They'll all say, yes, it should be made accessible, but what was growing as a movement back then is not in my backyard. And that's a concern that both advocates, patients, and legislators, among others, really need to be, I think, sensitive to. So we wrote those laws, and it was an 88-page document which became the law of the land, and it's been adopted now, as I understand it, by 14 states that have now become medical marijuana laws. Ours were the first in the country that took a comprehensive land use, public health, and law enforcement perspective. In 14, maybe now 15 states, I know there's what, 20 or 21 Prop 215 states that have occurred, and they've borrowed from our laws. And talking to other legislators from around the country, like in Los Angeles, who didn't have any laws on the books, and where there had been such severe blowback after there had been complete anarchy in Los Angeles, that had now boomeranged back for it being a pretty strong shutdown of clubs, not just by federal government, but by state and local authorities as well, too. And as sheriff, I've made it very clear that not only do I support decriminalization, I support legalization. And it's a lonely position to be part of when I'm in a meeting with my elected sheriffs, my peers from around the state of California, who have a very opposite opinion than I do, and we try to, I think, have a conversation, about the merits of the differences of our position, and they're extremely respectful, but they're the majority and I am not. But the reason I do this is not just because it's about access, it's because from a public safety perspective, I'm a sheriff of a major city in the United States, I don't like what I see in terms of the criminal syndicate that's involved in the fact that with marijuana still being considered a class or Schedule I drug, and how the federal government continues to promote that stratification of where I think violence and where I think the illegal activity that surrounds the production and sale of marijuana, as long as it remains illegal, tortures so many areas around the country that continues to perpetrate this drug of war of drugs, on drugs, where it really has failed to the point where other states, like Colorado and Washington, which have kind of blown the conversation out of the water to demonstrate we need to do something different. And they've demonstrated that. And they've done it smartly by taking it to the people, and then based on the will of the people, trying to recreate, re-engineer an infrastructure that supports that voice, that democratic voice. And I think in California, I've been outspoken where I say I think we should pilot, if we can pilot in a way where it's not so threatening so that it feeds the fear-mongering, that allows people to suggest, you know, the sky will fall in, cave in on us, if there is some form of legalization, but to do it in a way where I think all of our instincts will be affirmed that this is a direction that is the next progression of where we should go in taking that sort of criminal syndication out of the marijuana trade, in making it available in a way so that precious and limited resources aren't constantly diverted from public safety or a public health perspective or from a government perspective into, I think, the suppression of a marijuana sort of trade and redivert those limited resources to other areas that woefully need them. And so I'm looking at it from a very academic perspective. And being a legislator here in San Francisco for 7 years and now sheriff, and before that I was in the district attorney's office in San Francisco for 9 years, and before that I was the aide to then supervisor Terrence Hallinan, who had been one of the greatest voices in support of medical marijuana before there was ever a Prop 215 or SB 420. You know, that's a network of thinking that I joined. And so I come here and say, you know, congratulations on your resilience to Axis of Love, and your endurance. Please don't do anything that makes us to have to come to you from our office. You know,
I try not.
Yeah, but you know, here my opinion is my opinion, and as an elected, I will share my opinions, and I always have, very openly and overtly, candidly, and that's just who I am. But the law is the law, and this is that duality that we have to pirouette around, that even in San Francisco, which is seen to be a very enlightened city, what I've detected over the last few years is that conservatism that we really, you know, sort of confronted and did something about over a decade ago, with the Board of Supervisors being very different back then compared to, say, now. You know, and a climate, a political climate, where people again might be on the street saying, we absolutely support medical marijuana, or we support legalization or decriminalization, but again, not in their backyard, is a very easy reflex for people, you know, to just share with folks. And then it shuts the conversation down. And then that creates this odd tension that I think belies really what a San Francisco was meant to be, as it really facilitates this issue of access for medical cannabis, and beyond that, what's the status of recreational cannabis. So you're at an interesting juncture. We are at an interesting juncture politically, socially, about marijuana. This is similar to a conversation I even had with more clubs back when Prop 19 was being tested on the ballot. And as poorly written as that was, and it had its problems, my recommendation back then as a supervisor was support it. And I know that that wasn't popular with people, because what I detected back then, even though it went down, is that that was going to be the canary in the coal mine, and that we needed some probe out there politically and more of a unifying force behind it, so that legalization could be tested in California. And we know since then, because it wasn't the most well put together initiative or operation, and it met incredible challenge at the ballot box, every effort in Sacramento has really withered because it wasn't able to move it forward beyond what didn't happen in a way that it should. So California is now on the defensive. 215 and 420 is very much on a defensive posture, whereas other states like Colorado and Washington have figured out more of a charm offensive in order to get this issue across. And so oddly, California, like with same-sex marriage, that really pioneered in these laws, like same-sex marriage, pioneered, you know, on medical marijuana, but it's other states who, less conspicuously, have now sort of taken the baton and run with it. And while maybe that might be the Zen role of California, to be a catalyst, you know, to be kind of a catalyst in helping other states move things forward, and that could very well be,
my message is we should not, retreat, which is why I'm here to say congratulations on, your endurance and your resilience. But really the movement itself needs to find that body in the denominator of unification. It needs to, because the movement has shrunk to the point where, and it's decentralized to the point where it doesn't speak with cohesion. Not that it always has, but it used to speak with more of a roar than it does now. And whether you invent a Democratic club or whatever, the fact remains that as I check in on Democratic clubs, neighborhood Democratic clubs, that if this issue is not also on the forefront of the philosophy of those Democratic clubs, neighborhood Democratic clubs, that is also an indicator of how the issue has also receded from their interests. When as before, there would be a number of issues like AIDS, HIV, an address towards the poverty in San Francisco, an address towards access to proper health care, pain management, etc. That was always part of a normal menu in my kind of growing up in elected politics. When you go to these neighborhood Democratic clubs, even in the most moderate to conservative forums, where this was a normal part of the agenda. If this is backseated so much as a part of the agenda, then really that is a telltale sign that there has to be a shift in strategy. There just has to be a shift in strategy. And it's probably time for a charm offensive of our own kind in California, in San Francisco, and one that needs to be sent is a message to the federal government. Because, I am privy to, when I hear about where the federal state government's coming from, positions I do not necessarily like or agree with, but as long as that this is a Schedule I drug in the eyes of the feds, they will continue, I think, to bully or continue to flex muscle in a way that really puts us back in a defensive posture. And there was a time, just ending on this note, there was a time when the feds would flex, or the state would flex their muscle, elected officials would come running to the defense of the dispensaries, or come running to the defense of, listen, we're trying something real here, we're trying to be constructive, maybe it's not foolproof in its, in its implementation, but we're trying something here under the management or co-management of government, nonprofit and private industry, let us try. And that, response is a healthy response by local officials, but absent of that response now, when the feds flex their muscles at times or intervene in the way that they do, is also telling that it's not on the front burner the way that it used to be 10 or 15 years ago. So those are all the indicators, that kind of give me a different or maybe similar snapshot as you all, but from a law enforcement perspective and a policy person who really advocated for this community back then, this is something that, that I try to package together, and this is my message. I think that, there just needs to be more of a coming together and a more of an educating, to the public, and then an exchange of what is the future, a conversation, exchange, maybe a policy debate of what is the future of medical cannabis, marijuana, and its access in San Francisco and beyond that. What is the exchange of what role do we play in the state of California's interest in addressing larger issues that continue to vex both people, citizenry, and government in this state? And what are those lessons learned from Colorado and Washington in such a way where we might be able to apply them here in California? So with that, again, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you.
Thank you.
Ross, on Sundays, I watch the talking heads, the politicals in the morning and stuff. And when they do talk about cannabis, they all seem to agree that as individuals, whether it's in Washington or it's in other legislature bodies, that if you ask individually the people, there's enough people that say they favor it, but when they get in the room to vote for it, they don't vote as they said they would when they were talked to individually. As a body, they're not doing what they say. And as individuals, when they come together as a body, or it should have already been taken care of according to the way the pundits have been talking about it.
I read recently that Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom said he supports legalization, and I swear my head did a 360. I could not believe what I read, and he put that out there in some radio or media interview. And I remember that when he was mayor and I was supervisor of District 5, who authored the legislation, he was so vehemently against. Now I appreciate though if his philosophy or position has evolved, and it's an important perch from where he says, being lieutenant governor, that if he does support that, I think that's, I welcome that. That's good. But should it come down to the nitty-gritty of anybody who comes around in defense of electeds, that come around in defense of medical marijuana or talks about legalization for both medical and recreational, then really the devil in the detail means you've got to stand by that position, and they'll begin to, I think, wither or recede once you get into the policy brass tacks, the nuts and bolts. And that's true on a state level, and that will be true on the local level, which is why it's important to have that sort of, that political arm that I think you were contemplating. So I was walking in, I heard you talking a little bit about this, that political arm that really keeps, I think, legislators, supervisors, I think, informed of why it is they cannot retreat from the position of supporting. And it's really important to have that. And that means retrenching in areas where you think that you need to retrench.
Two things. One, a comment. I think a lot of the decentralization of sort of the medical marijuana movement in San Francisco has to do with a lot of the newer collectives and clubs, and some of the older ones have become very apolitical, and they've also kind of believed that there's nothing for them in City Hall, so why bother showing up and nothing is going to get done. So there's a lot of apathy in our community right now, which is really scary because we're going through waves of crackdown, which it's just interesting that there was a very high rate of success in decentralizing our community, and I think there was, different factors going on, but who had really benefited was not our community, and it's a sad thing that it's taken place. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is I was reading online that Eric Holder will be here this week, or is actually in San Francisco right now, and that he's going to do something regarding small amounts or of really any substance, so kind of going along the lines with some of the Central American countries that have just outright stopped criminalizing small amounts in mass incarceration. And on top of that, I understand that San Francisco, still the majority of people that are put in jail for small amounts of cannabis are poor. And so I'm wondering if you know anything about what Eric Holder is going to do on Monday, or...
Well, you had a couple of comments there I'd like to address.
Yeah, sorry.
First thing is, Sheriff, I have made a very explicit policy that possession for marijuana, you are not in our jails. And out of the 1,400, and we have a record low jail population right now in San Francisco. Well, it's not because of that, but it's kind of an interesting phenomena that's occurring because with realignment, it's working out much differently in San Francisco in a very positive way than other counties that I think are going through some torture. Our jail population in San Francisco is per capita the lowest jail population in the state of California right now. They've never seen this before. So it's a fascinating time to be sheriff and to be at a larger table with other sheriffs and hear the conversation beyond this question of marijuana, but just hear the conversation, because the criminal justice industry is literally in a flux, and it's hard to say what the outcomes will be, if it will be positive or negative, but in San Francisco, I'm optimistic. And optimistic in terms of where I'm seeing the symmetry between district attorney and public defender and adult probation and sheriff and juvenile probation and local government. I'm seeing sort of a synchronicity that I've just never seen before. And I've been involved in local government for nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
And so, and out of that 1,400 that's in our jail system, less than 20 are misdemeanors. So you won't have really possession for felony, not in San Francisco, unless it's attached to a bank robbery or something else. But literally 20 are misdemeanors that are inside of our jail system as of today. We just don't allow people with misdemeanors for the most part on the non-violent, non-serious, if they're a wobbler, felony, or misdemeanor into the jail system. So our diversion programs are working effectively and or showing that they're starting to work effectively. On Eric Holder, he also gestured a few years ago that they would back off. About that was going to be their objective, but through the DEA and through the U.S. Attorney's Office, and then in concert with the state attorney generals, California and others, they really began a very severe crackdown. And, you know, when you get a letter from the IRS or you get a letter from, you know, the feds on this question, it's a deflating moment and likely one that you sort of overcome. And so that's why we've seen such, you know, I think, such incredible tension that's occurring municipally. And my response when I'd see this happen to others is, where is, you know, the elected officials coming together to voice concern? And they too might have been deflated by all this and feeling bereft of not having a response themselves. But this is where that test comes of executing what do we just do? Sit back and let it happen, or do you organize? Is there another question?
Mine was about Sheriff Holder, also hoping you might have some inside information. I'm sure he communicates with you all the time, and Jason Boone's out here for the same question.
I was invited to, I can't go, it's the American Bar Association.
Yeah.
I was invited, and a number of ongoing events. I still may make one of the events, whether he's speaking or something else. But it's good that they're having the convention in San Francisco and in California. Again, I think we really are a laboratory, a petri dish with Governor Brown and now the Supreme Court's realignment of our prison population. What it does, it forces counties to be more effective, if they can, but caring about reentry and rehabilitation. San Francisco, pre-Governor Brown and pre-prisoner realignment, 8109, was already starting to do that. And, you know, just to toot my horn for a second, I wrote the legislation that created what's called the Reentry Council and campaigned on that when I campaigned for sheriff, because I believe in the redemptive power when one runs afoul of the system, that I really believe that we have to have a criminal justice system that manages the level of punishment, but also is supportive in somebody's ability and our ability to instigate proper reentry and transition back into the system. And those have to be, you can't sort of backseat rehabilitation to incarceration. You can't do that. This is why I think the criminal justice system in the United States is just so messed up, and as well as in California. And that includes, because it used to be in San Francisco, it's less so, but that 70% of a population that's inside the jails will have a substance abuse problem. And so that substance abuse problem, 70%, that would be the composition of those in our jail system, and the federal system would be 80%. That means that they weren't managing, you know, the kind of treatment or substance abuse in a way that gets to the heart of what was driving this over-incarceration in the criminal justice system. In that, you know, stew of a problem, you know, are those implicated for possession or selling of marijuana too, naturally. But overall, when we look at that problem and we see how the war on drugs, and you see the expense that is incurred because of that war on drugs, and then that responsibility that's deflected to local government to just deal with it, and they do so just by criminalizing as much as that they have in the past. This is why I think that there is a potential sea change in the criminal justice system in California. That's why it's such interesting times.
Well, the industry, the prison industry is it's privatized now, and like everybody's got an interest in. They want to sell what they're pushing, and they want people in prison. They want to let people that are going to have strict, no tolerance, one joint you're in prison,
Right.
And then they put them to work, so it's slave labor.
Well, as long as they make it, it's true, and I think that in California we've over-incarcerated to the point where even with the test of realignment, for the counties that are really reacting negatively because they so over-incarcerated, especially the Southern California counties, by sending people to the state, to the prisons of the state, that they were starting to return, but they had no rehabilitation programs, at least en masse, to deal with. So they were telling Governor Brown, stop. And then he tried, the Supreme Court overruled, coming back. In San Francisco, we have infrastructure. Now, I'm not asking, please give me more added responsibility without the resources, but I am saying with a level of confidence we have infrastructure. And it's, I think, an honest assessment of where we're at. But as it comes back to the question of the usage of drugs in the drug trade and how it really is a driver of the criminal justice system, this is why this needs to be peeled from it, so that there is a greater and a more effective federal approach that I'm hoping Holder actually might have some real substantive and words of wisdom to this question, because the dial down from the feds to the state to the local government has just got us wasting resources right and left.
If it was just done blanket 10,000 inmates released, that a large percentage that will be eligible are real violent people that for some reason, I guess we don't have enough just marijuana violators to be released to make up that 10,000 and leave the violence, people in there. I don't understand why we're so afraid about the amount of violent people that would be released under that mandate.
Well, you do want to receive them and be able to account, because there's liability attached to this, that when somebody repeats their offense, recidivism rates, repeat offender rates in the country, state, and it has been in the city, have been high, unacceptably high. And so I would dislike that we release somebody and then they go and commit a heinous crime, if in fact that not everything was done in the way that I think it should. And we can't be foolproof about it as much as I think we would like, but we should damn well strive to be. We should damn well strive to be, and for those arms of the government on the federal or state or even local levels who are faced with this, again, the wake-up call by what is occurring because of realignment is that you've got to put reentry, proper reentry planning for somebody who's incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, really on that front burner. And it can't be incarceration strictly alone. Some people may not be salvaged in the way that you're able to from a very, very violent offender, and I'm being very generic about that. But you cannot not try either. You just cannot not try. And there are proven programs that you really, have to deploy and make sure that the person undergoing it is compelled, to follow the way through. And the privatization is something that we worry about. In that the private and the prison guard industry, they're an effective force. Excuse me. But one debate I want to be careful is that here, even in San Francisco, this will probably crop up a little bit because we need to replace one of our jails. The Hall of Justice at 850 Brighton is going to be demolished. And the conditions in the Hall of Justice are the two jails, jails 3 and 4, are deplorable. I mean, they're just deplorable. They should have been demolished ages ago. It's an old linear style jail where the Johnny Cash song, Walk the Line, that's what you do, you walk the line, because there's cells on both sides where people are kind of sardined into those areas. Because of how condensed and compact that is, and the way people are sardined, we can't get any programming in there. And a decision years ago was decided to demolish the Hall of Justice, which is going to happen, and there had been a decision to rebuild a larger jail.